At exactly 2:14 in the morning, my phone screen lit up, not with an apology, but with a stream of photos from the cousin I had taken in. Laughing in my own bed with my husband, she sent a challenge claiming she now kept the home I built. She had no idea those photos were merely the trigger for a devastating legal plan I had silently prepared for 6 months, one that would leave her homeless overnight. My name is Audrey, and at 38 years old, standing at the helm of Aura Spaces as its CEO, I thought I had designed every aspect of my life with the same precision I applied to my architectural blueprints. I was wrong. The silence of the master bedroom was usually my sanctuary, but tonight, the darkness felt heavy, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. The clock on the bedside table read 2:14 in the morning when the vibration began. It was not a single notification, but a barrage, a relentless digital assault that pulled me from a fitful sleep. Nathan, my husband, was not beside me. He had kissed my forehead hours ago, claiming an emergency meeting with angel investors in the city, a lie so practiced it had almost sounded like the truth. I reached for the phone, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. The name on the screen was Chloe, my 24-year-old cousin, the girl I had taken in when her family lost everything, the girl whose tuition I paid, the girl I hired to give her a fresh start. I swiped open the message, expecting an emergency. Instead, I was greeted by 50 high-resolution photographs. They were not blurry, hasty snaps. They were composed with a cruel intent, showcasing Chloe and Nathan entangled in the sheets of the master suite at our lakefront villa, the very sanctuary I had spent the last year meticulously designing. The audacity was breathtaking. In one frame, Chloe was draped in my vintage ivory silk robe, the one Nathan had bought me in Paris. In another, the diamond pendant I inherited from my grandmother rested against her collarbone, but it was the bottle of wine on the nightstand that made my blood run cold. It was the 1995 vintage I had been saving for our 10th wedding anniversary. They had popped the cork and were drinking it out of the crystal flutes I reserved for special occasions. A normal woman might have screamed. She might have thrown the phone against the wall or collapsed in a heap of sobbing despair. But I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, a terrifying glacial calm washed over me. It started at my fingertips and froze my heart into a block of ice. My 6-year-old son, Leo, was sleeping in the room down the hall, and I would not disturb his dreams with the noise of my heartbreak. I zoomed in on the photos, my eyes scanning the background with the analytical gaze of a designer looking for flaws. That was when I saw it. In the corner of a photo where Nathan was laughing with his head thrown back, there was a stack of documents on the bedside table. The cover page was clearly visible. Horizon Peak. My breath hitched. That was the code name for the most confidential project Aura Spaces was currently developing. Nathan had no security clearance for that file. He had no reason to have it, let alone take it to a lake house for a tryst. The pieces clicked together with a sickening finality. This was not just a betrayal of marriage. It was an act of war. Nathan was not just sleeping with my cousin. He was stealing my trade secrets to build his own empire on the ashes of mine. He was cannibalizing my life's work to fund his escape with her. I moved with mechanical precision. I downloaded every single image. I uploaded them to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers, organizing them into folders I named adultery, asset violation, and corporate espionage. Once the evidence was secured, I stared at Chloe's taunting caption about keeping the home. I did not type a paragraph of rage. I did not demand an explanation. I selected a single emoji, a simple, yellow smiling face, and hit send. I imagined the terror that would grip her when she saw that benign symbol instead of the explosion she craved. Setting the phone down, I walked silently down the hallway to Leo's room. The soft glow of his nightlight illuminated his innocent face. I watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, feeling the cold rage in my gut harden into a weapon. They wanted my life. They wanted my company. They wanted to steal the future I was building for my son. I smoothed the hair back from Leo's forehead and made a silent vow to the darkness. Nathan and Chloe had woken a beast they were not equipped to fight. I would not just divorce him. I would dismantle him, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but the ruin he deserved. By 7 o'clock that morning, the kitchen smelled of freshly brewed coffee and toasted bagels, just as it did every other day. I moved through the routine with the practiced ease of an actress on opening night. I packed Leo's lunchbox, tied his shoelaces, and kissed his cheek at the school drop-off zone, my smile never faltering even as my mind raced with cold calculations. As soon as his teacher led him away, the mask dropped. I sat in my car and made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney, a shark who specialized in high-asset divorces. The second was to Julian, a forensic accountant and digital investigator I had used for corporate audits in the past. I told him to freeze nothing but to watch everything. I needed a full autopsy of our finances going back 24 months. When I returned home, Nathan was walking through the front door. He slumped his shoulders, feigning exhaustion, and rubbed his eyes theatrically. He told me the negotiations had run all night and he was barely standing, but as I leaned in to take his jacket, the scent hit me like a physical blow. It was not the stale coffee and dry erase markers of a boardroom. It was a cloying, synthetic vanilla scent, Chloe's signature perfume. It was cheap and unmistakable. I looked him in the eye and told him he looked terrible and should go rest. I played the role of the concerned wife to perfection, while he showered, washing away the physical evidence of his infidelity. I accessed his phone, which he had carelessly left charging on the kitchen island. It took me less than 3 minutes to install a mirroring spyware application. I did the same to the navigation system in his car while he slept, ensuring I would know his location within 3 meters at all times. By noon, Julian had the preliminary report ready. The numbers on the screen were damning. Nathan had not just been careless. He had been systematically draining aura spaces. He had set up 3 shell companies under Chloe's name, billing my firm for consulting services that never happened. Tens of thousands of dollars were bleeding out every month, but the rage truly ignited when I looked at the personal accounts. The substantial fund we had set aside for Leo's university education was nearly empty. The transaction history showed a wire transfer to a luxury dealership for a sports car registered to Chloe and a massive down payment on a penthouse in the city center. He was financing his mistress's lifestyle with our son's future. The betrayal ran deeper than just my husband. I decided to check the cloud logs for the home security system. Nathan believed he had disabled the cameras in the living room, but he had only turned off the video feed, leaving the high-fidelity audio recording active. I listened to a timestamp from 2 days prior. The voices of my mother-in-law, Patricia, and Chloe were crystal clear. Patricia was laughing, telling Chloe that she was a much better fit for Nathan because she was young and obedient. Then came the line that made my skin crawl. Patricia speculated on how long it would take for me to simply die from overwork so they could inherit the empire I built without a fight. The final nail in his coffin was a digital scan Julian found deep in Nathan's deleted email items. It was a contract with a private lender, a notorious loan shark operation. Nathan had borrowed a significant sum against our primary residence. At the bottom of the page, next to his signature, was mine. It was a decent forgery, but it was a forgery nonetheless. He had committed a felony fraud against his own wife to secure the loan. I printed every document, every bank statement, and every transcript. I compiled them into a heavy black binder. I could have destroyed him that afternoon. I could have called the police and had him arrested for fraud before dinner. But that would have been too merciful. I placed the binder in my safe and spun the dial. I would wait. I needed the stage to be bigger, the audience to be larger, and the fall to be absolutely fatal. As I watched Nathan slice into his steak at the head of our dining table, the present moment seemed to blur, overlaid by the ghostly images of the last 15 years. I remembered the days when I built aura spaces from a cramped studio apartment with nothing but grit and a maxed-out credit card. Back then, Nathan was just a floundering sales associate who could not close a deal to save his life. It was I who rewrote his pitches, I who bought him the suits that made him look successful, and I who dragged him up the ladder of social standing rung by rung. He did not climb that mountain. I carried him on my back. Then there was Chloe. I recalled the rainy night she showed up on my doorstep, sobbing and shivering because her parents had finally thrown her out for her erratic behavior. I did not turn her away. I took her in, fed her, and treated her not like a distant cousin, but like the little sister I never had. I taught her how to dress with class, how to speak with confidence, and how to navigate the world. But I should have noticed the way her eyes lingered on my reflection in the mirror a little too long. It was not admiration. It was a hungry, consuming envy. She did not just want to be like me, she wanted to be me. Whenever I traveled for business, she would conveniently find reasons to drop by the house to keep Nathan company, modeling the very style I had cultivated for her. My mother-in-law, Patricia, sat across from me now, complaining about the texture of the risotto. It was a familiar tune. For over a decade, she had sneered that I was too aggressive, too focused on business, and not enough of a homemaker. She scrutinized my long hours while conveniently ignoring that it was my hard work that paid for her arthritis medication, her cable bill, and the roof over her ungrateful head. To her, I was a walking checkbook with a personality flaw, while her son was a golden child who could do no wrong. Snapping back to the present, the betrayal had moved from the shadows into the fluorescent lights of my office. Chloe had begun showing up at Aura Spaces this week, flaunting a badge that read Special Assistant, a position Nathan had created without clearing it through human resources. She paraded through the corridors, purposely leaving buttons undone and leaning over Nathan's desk in full view of the staff. It was a clumsy, desperate attempt to provoke a scene. She wanted me to scream, to act the part of the jealous, hysterical wife, thereby shattering my professional authority. I denied her that satisfaction. Instead of causing a scene, I called the head of HR into my office and quietly instructed them to log every single instance of her tardiness, her dress code violations, and her lack of qualifications. I was building a paper trail so thick it would bury them. Nathan interpreted my silence as submission. His arrogance swelled like a balloon. He grew sloppy, ceasing his efforts to hide the shell company transfers, assuming I was too busy or too weak to notice the hemorrhage of funds. That evening, I had convened this dinner under the guise of a family meeting to discuss expanding our investment portfolio. I laid out a series of documents on the table, explaining that we needed to leverage our personal assets to secure a new, lucrative commercial loan. In reality, these papers shifted full personal liability for any future debt onto Nathan alone, explicitly detaching my assets from his risky ventures. Blinded by greed and the promise of more money to steal, Nathan signed his name on the dotted line without reading the fine print. I watched as Chloe slipped her foot out of her shoe and ran it up Nathan's leg under the table, a smirk playing on her lips as she met his gaze. They thought they were so clever, hiding in plain sight. I picked up my wine glass, the crystal catching the light, and offered a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. I proposed a toast to the bold steps we were taking and to a future that would be full of surprises for everyone at the table. They clinked their glasses against mine, drinking deeply, completely unaware that the wine they were swallowing was the only victory they would ever taste again. The gala for Aura Spaces was not merely the social event of the season, but the culmination of my entire career. The ballroom was draped in silver and sapphire, reflecting the innovative design of our new collection. However, for Nathan, this night was meant to be a launchpad for his betrayal. I had read the drafts of the speech he had hidden in his private email folder. He intended to use the platform of our success to announce his departure to start a new firm, financed by the capital he had stolen from me, with Chloe introduced as his partner. He believed he was stepping into the spotlight to announce his independence, but he did not realize I had turned the stage into a scaffold for his reputation. My morning began with a silent maneuver to secure the kingdom. I sat with my estate attorney and transferred the complete intellectual property rights of the Horizon Peak project and the majority of the company's liquid assets into an irrevocable trust for Leo. By the time Nathan or his creditors tried to touch the money, it would be locked behind a fortress of legal protections. Next, I convened a secret emergency meeting with the three largest shareholders. When I projected the evidence of Nathan's embezzlement onto the wall of the private conference room, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to cold fury. They wanted to fire him on the spot, but I persuaded them to hold their fire. I needed them to witness the public exposure to ensure he could never work in this industry again. They agreed to sit in the front row and wait for my signal. At 5 in the afternoon, my phone vibrated with a message from Chloe. It was a photo of her wearing a backless emerald gown that I knew cost $4,000 because the charge had appeared on my statement an hour prior. Her text read that tonight I would see who the real queen of the party was. I stared at the image without blinking. I opened my banking application and froze the secondary credit card Nathan carried, the one he was currently using to settle the final bills for the event production. 10 minutes later, I received an alert that a transaction for $6,000 to the catering company had been declined. I smiled, imagining the sweat breaking out on his forehead as he frantically tried to explain the embarrassment to the vendors. My mother-in-law, Patricia, called me moments later, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She demanded that I allow Chloe to stand on the podium during the honors ceremony, claiming the girl had made significant contributions to the team dynamic. I told Patricia that I thought it was a wonderful idea and that I would ensure Chloe received exactly the attention she deserved. Patricia hung up, thinking she had won a small victory, unaware she had just walked her favorite accomplice into the line of fire. Alone in the control booth before the guests arrived, I made the final swap. I accessed the main presentation server and replaced the slide deck. Gone were the architectural renderings and profit projections. In their place, I uploaded the forensic accounting flowcharts, the forged loan documents, and the timeline of their affair matched against the stolen company data. I saved the file and walked away. As a final test, a singular act of grace I knew would be rejected. I sent an anonymous gift to the dressing room where Chloe was getting ready. It was a small box containing a typed resignation letter and a one-way plane ticket to a different state. It was a chance to leave with her dignity intact. I was told later that she laughed, tore the paper into pieces, and tossed it into the trash can. She had sealed her own fate. I entered the ballroom at 7:30. The cameras flashed, blinding and rapid. I walked through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting compliments, projecting an aura of absolute power. I spotted Nathan and Chloe huddled in a corner, clinking champagne flutes, whispering and giggling like teenagers who had gotten away with a prank. They looked at me with a smug pity, believing I was the ignorant wife about to be discarded. I returned their gaze with a serene smile, knowing that in less than an hour, the ground beneath their feet would open up and swallow them whole. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation as Nathan took the stage, gripping the podium with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He launched into his speech, his voice projecting a practiced humility that I knew was entirely manufactured. He spoke of visionary leadership and the sacrifices required to build an empire, stealing my narrative and claiming it as his own. Then, with a flourish of his hand that was meant to be charming, he invited Chloe to join him. He introduced her to the room as the muse of the Horizon Peak project, crediting her with an inspiration she was incapable of possessing. She glided onto the stage in her stolen emerald gown, waving to the crowd like royalty. Oblivious to the trapdoor beneath her feet, Nathan raised the remote control, ready to unveil the architectural renderings that would define our fiscal year. He clicked the button, and the massive LED screen behind them illuminated. But instead of the sleek, modern lines of a skyscraper, the screen displayed a blown-up, high-definition image of a bank statement. It was a transfer of $15,000 from the corporate expense account to a shell company, labeled clearly as consulting fees, but routed directly to a personal account in Chloe's name. A collective gasp swept through the room, sucking the oxygen out of the space. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan and Chloe turned around, their smiles freezing into grotesque masks of horror as they processed what was looming over them, their faces drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray under the harsh stage lights. Before they could move, the slide transitioned. The next image was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was Nathan's official itinerary for a business trip to Chicago 3 months ago. On the right was a geotagged selfie of him and Chloe drinking champagne in a hot tub in Cabo San Lucas, dated the exact same weekend. Below the photo, I had included a screenshot of their text exchange from that day, where they mocked me for staying behind to handle the quarterly audit, calling me a joyless workhorse who was funding their paradise. I stepped onto the stage. The click of my heels on the hardwood floor echoed through the stunned silence. I gently took the microphone from Nathan's limp hand. He looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal, unable to speak. I turned to the audience, my voice steady and calm. I apologized for the technical interruption, clarifying that while the architectural slides were missing, the data currently on the screen was the only structural reality that mattered tonight. I turned to my husband and my cousin and spoke clearly into the microphone so that every reporter, investor, and livestream viewer could hear. I announced their immediate termination from Aura Spaces for gross misconduct, embezzlement of company funds, and violation of their fiduciary duties. I signaled to the side of the stage, and 4 uniformed security guards emerged from the shadows. As the guards moved to escort them off the stage, the shock wore off, and chaos erupted. Chloe began to scream. She did not cry with remorse. She shrieked with the entitlement of a brat who had been denied a toy. She thrashed against the security guard, pointing a manicured finger at me and yelling that I was a cruel, heartless witch. She looked deranged, her elegance shattering instantly to reveal the ugly character beneath. Nathan tried to salvage his dignity, stammering into the dead air that this was all a misunderstanding, a terrible accounting error. But the front row, filled with the shareholders I had briefed, stood up. One of them shouted that there was no misunderstanding theft. Then, from the floor, my mother-in-law made her move. Patricia charged toward the stage, her face twisted in a snarl, intending to slap me for humiliating her golden boy. She never made it up the stairs. Security intercepted her halfway, holding her back as she flailed and cursed. Phones were raised everywhere, capturing the entire meltdown in real time. I watched them being dragged away, a pathetic trio of greed. I turned back to the crowd, smoothed my dress, and concluded the evening by stating that my legal team would be filing criminal charges in the morning. I did not look like a victim. I stood alone in the spotlight, unshakable and victorious, while they were dragged into the darkness they deserved. The humiliating spectacle at the gala was only the beginning of their night. When Nathan and Chloe finally dragged themselves back to the villa, exhausted and disgraced, they found the iron gates firmly shut. Nathan tried to punch in his access code on the keypad, but the light flashed an angry, unforgiving red. I had reset the entire smart home system the moment I left for the party. They were locked out of the sanctuary they had defiled. On the curb, illuminated by the harsh yellow glow of the street lamp, lay a pile of their belongings. I had not packed them with care. Expensive suits were crumpled together with shoes, and Chloe's designer makeup bag was unzipped, spilling its contents onto the concrete. Taped to the top of Nathan's suitcase was a single white envelope. Inside, they found the notification that their corporate credit cards had been canceled and their mobile phone plans, which were under the company account, had been suspended effective immediately. They were stranded in the middle of the night, cashless and disconnected, with nothing but their bruised egos. With no other options, they were forced to retreat to my mother-in-law's house. Patricia lived in a cramped 2-bedroom bungalow in a fading neighborhood, a stark contrast to the sprawling estate Nathan had grown accustomed to. The walls there were thin, and the air conditioning had been broken for weeks. The reality of their new life set in immediately. Without the buffer of my money and my space, The romance that had thrived in secret luxury began to rot in the open air of poverty. The arguments started before they even unpacked. I heard later from a neighbor that the shouting matched the intensity of a thunderstorm. Nathan blamed Chloe, screaming that her arrogance and that taunting text message had provoked me into destroying them. Chloe fired back, her voice shrill, accusing him of being a powerless fraud who had led her on with promises of wealth he did not actually own. They tore at each other like starving dogs fighting over a scrap of meat, while they suffocated in that small house. I sat alone in my massive living room. The silence was vast, but for the first time in years, it did not feel lonely. It felt like freedom. I walked upstairs to Leo's room and curled up next to him. When he stirred, asking where his father was, I did not lie, but I did not burden him with the sordid details. I simply told him that things were going to be different now, that it would just be the two of us for a while, but that we were safe. I held him until he fell back asleep, feeling the fierce protective instinct of a mother lion who had just cleared her territory of hyenas. By morning, the story had gone viral. The live stream of the gala had been shared thousands of times. The public verdict was unanimous and overwhelming. Social media was flooded with support for me. The hashtag #AuraSpaces was trending, not for the scandal, but as a symbol of integrity and female empowerment. We received more inquiries for design consultations in 24 hours than we usually did in 3 months. My business was not just surviving, it was thriving on the truth. Nathan, on the other hand, was discovering that his reputation was radioactive. He spent the day frantically calling his old contacts, trying to secure a loan or a job interview. But the business world is small, and news travels fast. No one wanted to associate with a man who had embezzled from his wife and been publicly evicted from his own company. He was met with dial tones and cold rejections. The humiliation continued for Chloe. She walked out to the driveway of Patricia's house to find a tow truck hooking up the sports car Nathan had given her. She screamed at the driver that it was her property, only to learn the embarrassing truth. Nathan had never bought the car. It was a long-term lease under a shell company, and the payments were 3 months overdue. The leasing agency repossessed the vehicle, leaving her standing in the dust, stripped of the last symbol of her false status. That evening, my phone rang. It was Patricia. She was weeping, her voice trembling as she begged me to reconsider. She spoke of family and forgiveness, asking me to think of the years of bond we shared. I listened to her sobbing for a moment, remembering how she had laughed on the security tape while wishing for my death. I replied with a voice as cold as steel that the bond she spoke of had died the moment she encouraged her son to leave me. I hung up before she could answer. I did not waste another second. I instructed my lawyer to file for a unilateral divorce. I was not asking for mediation. I was demanding full physical and legal custody of Leo. The evidence I submitted was not just financial. It included the photos and the timestamps of Nathan's lifestyle, painting a clear picture of a man who was morally bankrupt and dangerously irresponsible. I was done playing the victim. I was rewriting the ending of this story, and in my version, the traitor lost everything. The settlement conference was intended to be a battle of wills, but I had arrived with a nuclear weapon while Nathan had brought a pocket knife. His attorney, a man with a cheap suit and an expensive ego, slid a proposal across the mahogany table with a smirk. He demanded 50% of #AuraSpaces, citing Nathan's years of so-called emotional support and operational contributions as grounds for an equitable split. It was a laughable assertion. I did not even look at the paper. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single blue folder, sliding it gently toward the lawyer. Inside were the loan documents Nathan had signed with the private lenders. I pointed to the signature line at the bottom and spoke in a low, even tone. I told them that the handwriting certainly looked like mine, but the forensic handwriting analysis inside that folder proved conclusively that it was a forgery committed by Nathan. The room went instantly silent. This was no longer a civil divorce negotiation about assets. It was now a conversation about a felony fraud conviction with a mandatory prison sentence. Before the lawyer could recover from the shock, I laid down the second blow. It was a stack of tax documents showing Nathan had been hiding income and systematically evading personal taxes for 5 years. The lawyer's face turned a sickly shade of white. He realized he was representing a client who was not just broke but legally radioactive. He actually began to pack his briefcase, muttering about a sudden conflict of interest and his desire to withdraw from the case. Meanwhile, Chloe tried to fight a war she did not understand. Desperate and seeing her potential payout vanishing, she sent me an encrypted email threatening to sell fabricated stories about my private life to the tabloids unless I paid her a settlement. I responded within the hour, not with cash, but with a process server. I slapped her with a civil lawsuit for defamation, extortion, and invasion of privacy, seeking damages of $500,000. It was a sum she could never hope to pay in 10 lifetimes, effectively burying her in debt before she could even open her mouth. The financial noose tightened violently around their necks outside the courtroom as well. The banks were calling in the loans Nathan had defaulted on, freezing what little assets he had left. Even worse, the predatory lenders he had dealt with began showing up at Patricia's bungalow. They banged on the door in the middle of the night, shouting demands for repayment and terrifying the neighbors. The chaos was absolute. Patricia was hysterical, realizing her small sanctuary was under siege because of her son's incompetence. I finally offered my ultimatum. We met one last time in the sterile conference room of my law firm. I told Nathan the terms were non-negotiable. He would sign the uncontested divorce papers immediately. He would relinquish all parental rights to Leo, and he would leave the city permanently, if he agreed. I would keep the forgery evidence in my safe and not hand it over to the district attorney. If he refused, I would walk out of that room and drive straight to the police station. Nathan hesitated, looking to his mother for support, perhaps expecting her to defend him one last time. But Patricia, terrified of the loan sharks and the prospect of losing her home to pay his debts, turned on him. She grabbed his arm and hissed at him to sign the papers, effectively sacrificing him to save herself. The maternal bond snapped under the weight of fear and greed. In the corner of the room, I saw the exact moment Chloe realized the game was over. She looked at Nathan, stripped of his money, his status, and his future, and her eyes went cold. She was a parasite looking for a new host, and Nathan was completely dry. She was already tapping on her phone under the table, likely scrolling through contacts to find a new victim. I looked at the man sitting across from me. He was shaking, holding the pen with trembling fingers. He used to be the love of my life, the father of my child. Now, looking at his slumped shoulders and defeated eyes, I felt absolutely no pain. The heartbreak had evaporated, leaving behind only a pure, crystalline contempt. He signed his name, and just like that, I was free. The ink had barely dried on the divorce papers when Chloe dropped the act. The facade of the supportive partner evaporated the second she realized the bank accounts were truly empty and the luxury vehicles were gone. She stood in the cramped hallway of my mother-in-law's bungalow, looking at Nathan with a sneer that curdled the air between them. She told him flatly that they were just not compatible anymore, claiming she needed space to find herself, which was a polite code for finding someone with a solvent bank account. Nathan, panicked and desperate, ran to the bedroom to retrieve his last remaining asset, a vintage watch he had managed to hide during the asset freeze. He intended to sell it to start over. The drawer was empty. Chloe had not just left him, she had looted him. She had pawned the watch that morning to buy a first-class ticket to Los Angeles, planning to hunt for a new benefactor before the dust settled. The confrontation that followed was violent and pathetic. Nathan lunged at her, screaming about betrayal, and they crashed into the cheap furniture, knocking over lamps and shattering vases. The noise was so deafening that the neighbors called the police. Blue lights flashed through the thin curtains, and both of them were hauled out in handcuffs, charged with domestic disturbance and disorderly conduct. Watching her son and her niece being shoved into the back of a squad car was too much for Patricia. She clutched her chest and collapsed on the porch. The stress had triggered a mild heart attack. The ambulance rushed her to the county hospital, but the intake process hit a wall. Patricia had no insurance, and Nathan was sitting in a holding cell with empty pockets. My phone rang an hour later. It was the hospital administrator. Nathan had listed me as his emergency contact years ago and never changed it. The woman on the line explained that Patricia needed immediate treatment, but they required a payment guarantee. I did not feel pity, but I felt a duty to the closure of this chapter. I gave them my credit card number over the phone and authorized the payment of $5,000 to cover her admission. When the nurse asked if I was coming to visit, I laughed softly. I told her that I was merely the charity, not the family, and refused to go. By the next morning, the mugshots of Nathan and Chloe were splashed across the local news websites. Any hope Nathan had of rebuilding his career turned to dust. No respectable firm would touch a man who was not only a known embezzler, but now had a violent criminal record and a history of domestic instability. He was a pariah, isolated and scorned by the very society he used to be so desperate to impress. Chloe fared no better. She never made it to her flight. 2 weeks later, a video surfaced on social media showing her in a high-end restaurant, being dragged by her hair by the furious wife of an older real estate tycoon she had tried to seduce. She was screaming and humiliated, stripped of the last shred of her dignity in front of a cheering crowd. Her reputation was not just damaged, it was incinerated. While their lives descended into chaos, mine was ascending. I spent my days finalizing the blueprints for our new international branch in London. Aura Spaces was growing faster than I could have imagined, fueled by a team that respected me and a public that admired my resilience. I was building an empire on my own terms. The final echo of my past marriage came late one rainy Tuesday night. My phone rang, displaying a blocked number. I answered to hear the heavy, slurred breathing of a man who had drunk too much cheap whiskey. Nathan was crying, his voice thick with self-pity. He begged me for just 5 minutes to see Leo, claiming he had changed and that he missed his son. I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a cold resolve. I told him firmly that Leo was sleeping soundly, surrounded by peace and love, and that he did not need a broken, toxic man confusing his life. I told him to never call this number again. I ended the call and blocked the number, severing the last thread of the rope he was using to hang on to me. Most people believed the story ended with the divorce decree, assuming that once the marriage was dissolved, the war was over. They were wrong. I had not yet played my final hand because I needed Nathan to be desperate enough to commit a crime that could not be erased by a good lawyer. Poverty does not build character in men like him. It breeds recklessness. My intelligence reports confirmed exactly what I had anticipated. Nathan was shopping the stolen data from the Horizon Peak project to our fiercest competitor, a firm known for its predatory tactics. He was offering to sell the proprietary blueprints and financial algorithms for a lump sum of $200,000, a fraction of their value, but enough to get him out of debt. He believed he had arranged a secret meeting with their acquisition director at a private boardroom downtown. What Nathan did not know was that the landscape of the market had shifted beneath his feet. 3 weeks ago, I had quietly executed a hostile takeover of that very competitor, purchasing 51% of their controlling shares through a blind trust. He was not walking into a den of thieves to sell his stolen goods. He was walking into a cage I had built specifically for him. I sat in the high-backed leather chair at the far end of the conference room, the blinds drawn against the morning sun. 2 plainclothes officers from the Economic Crimes Division stood silently in the shadows of the alcove. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door handle turned. Nathan entered, clutching a silver briefcase, looking older and more ragged than I had ever seen him. He wore a suit that was clearly unpressed, a ghost of the dapper man he used to be. He placed a black USB drive on the table, his eyes gleaming with the manic hope of a gambler about to win back his losses. When I spun the chair around to face him, The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might faint. He stammered my name, clutching the edge of the table for support. I did not raise my voice. I simply told him that I had been waiting for this moment. He tried to backtrack, grabbing the USB drive, claiming he was just there for a job interview. I shook my head slowly. The room was wired for sound and video. We had recorded his initial offer, his negotiation of the price, and his admission that the data was stolen from Aura Spaces. This was the moment the title of my cousin's taunt came full circle. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, red legal binder. These were the papers she feared most, though she never imagined they would bear her name alongside his. I tossed the file onto the polished wood between us. It landed with a heavy, final thud. I explained that inside that folder was a formal indictment for corporate espionage and fraudulent trading. The evidence was irrefutable. He had been caught in the act of selling trade secrets. But I had saved a special surprise for Chloe. I flipped the folder open to the second section. The investigation revealed that the shell companies Nathan used were registered in her name, and she had actively signed checks to liquidate the stolen funds. She was not just a bystander. She was an accessory to grand larceny and money laundering. The papers detailed the mandatory minimum prison sentences they were both facing. She had wanted to share his life and his wealth, so now she would share his cell block and his criminal record. The reality of his destruction hit him with the force of a physical blow. Nathan collapsed to his knees, disregarding the officers stepping forward with handcuffs. He crawled toward me, tears streaming down his face, begging for mercy. He invoked the years we spent together. He promised to disappear if I just let him go. It was a pitiful display of cowardice. I looked down at the man who had once shared my bed and felt nothing but a profound sense of closure. I told him that mercy was for those who made mistakes, not for those who made plans to destroy their families. I turned my back on him as the officers read him his rights. I walked toward the heavy double doors of the conference room and pushed them open. The hallway led straight to the lobby exit. I stepped out of the building and into the blinding brightness of the mid-morning sun. The warmth hit my face, chasing away the chill of the air-conditioned room. Behind me lay the wreckage of a toxic past, locked away in handcuffs and legal briefs. Ahead of me, the city skyline glittered with infinite possibility. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, sharp air of absolute victory. The nightmare was over, and I was finally awake. 3 months have passed since the gavel fell, bringing a quiet but absolute end to the chaos. The legal system was lenient with their physical freedom, but brutal with their futures. Nathan and Chloe avoided prison time, receiving suspended sentences and 300 hours of community service each. However, the court of public opinion issued a life sentence. Their names are now synonymous with deceit. I heard through the grapevine that Nathan is currently washing dishes at a diner on the outskirts of town, while Chloe is scrubbing floors at a budget motel to pay her rent. They are finally living the hard, unglamorous reality they used to mock from the comfort of my home. Patricia paid the highest price for her blind loyalty and greed. To cover the massive restitution Nathan owed to the creditors to avoid jail, she was forced to sell her bungalow. She now resides in a state-subsidized nursing home, a gray and cheerless place where the walls are thin and the visitors are non-existent. She spends her days in solitude, drowning in regret, realizing too late that the daughter-in-law she despised was the only person who had ever actually taken care of her. As for me, I decided that the name Aura Spaces carried too many ghosts of the past. I rebranded the company as Phoenix Rise. It was a public declaration that we had emerged from the fire stronger and more brilliant than before. The market responded with enthusiasm, and our revenue is up by 40% this quarter alone. I am no longer just a CEO, I am a symbol of resilience. Last week, a small package arrived at my office. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single Polaroid from 10 years ago, a picture of Chloe and me smiling at a carnival, with the word "sorry" scrawled on the back in black marker. I looked at the image and waited for a pang of nostalgia or a wave of pity. I felt absolutely nothing. I tore the photograph into 4 pieces and dropped them into the recycling bin. I understood then that forgiveness is a gift, and I refused to give it to people who were not worthy of receiving it. I sold the old villa and moved Leo to a coastal city 500 miles away. We live in a home I designed from the ground up. It has wide windows, open spaces, and light wood floors. There is not a single corner in this house that holds a memory of Nathan. It is a sanctuary of pure beginnings. I also met someone recently. He is a landscape architect I collaborated with on a project. He is kind, soft-spoken, and listens with genuine respect when I speak. It is not a passionate whirlwind, but a steady, calming connection. I am in no rush. I am learning that love does not have to be volatile to be real. I channeled my anger into ink, writing a memoir about my journey through the crisis. It hits the shelves next month. It is not a story about being a victim. It is a tactical manual on how to weaponize your pain and protect your empire. I want every woman who reads it to know that they are not defined by who leaves them, but by what they build after the door closes. Tonight, I stand on the balcony, listening to the rhythmic sound of the ocean crashing against the shore. My phone chimes. It is not a threat at 2:14 in the morning. It is a text from Leo, sending me a red heart emoji and wishing me sweet dreams from his room down the hall. I smile and turn off the screen. I take a deep breath of the salty air, tasting the peace I fought so hard to win. I finally understand that the best revenge was never about hurting them. The best revenge is living a life so magnificent and full of light that they can never touch it again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Audrey's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and rebirth, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the like button to help this story reach even more people.